As you know, we use this platform to share stories of resilience. And today I have a very special guest. Hey, everybody. It's your host, Sally Allen, again from the Sally Allen podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we have a very distinguished guest, and I'm so excited to have her on my podcast. We actually met at a networking event, and she was part of a panelist that I moderated. And I absolutely love her story, love what she stood for, and that's the reason why she's here. Please help me welcome Dr. Menije Turner.
Thank you so much for having me here, Sally.
Yes. And to introduce her a little bit, she is a psychologist, a licensed psychologist in California. And her specialty and what she actually talks about is perfectionist. We could all use some lesson in that topic. So again, welcome. I'm so glad you agreed to make an appearance as a guest on my podcast, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to share with us today.
I'm looking forward to it. Let's go.
Yeah, yeah. So I know you and I talked a little bit a couple of days ago, and we went through, just a quick synopsis of what we will be talking about. But I will give you the stage and have you start sharing your story with us and how you got on to the topic or the lane of perfectionist.
I would love to. And it started from, to kind of start from the beginning. I was born in Istanbul, so I'm originally from Turkey. And I was born and raised there. And I moved to the States with my family 2 weeks before I turned 15. And that's something that my therapist and I ended up talking a lot about because there's something about this transition taking place in the middle of your adolescence that really does shape you. And there are some wonderful strengths that I gained, and there were also many challenges. Some of them has to do with in my personal life when you move to a new state. And for here, I'm fluent in English, so I ended up becoming a parents translator when we are on, outside doing the school runs or anything that was related to like being a translator for them. I will take on that adult role, and then you go home then it goes back to that parent child dynamics and parent child relationship. So there was a lot of family dynamics that really changed, and there were a lot of challenges that came from it. And I realize now, looking back, there were also some social challenges for me. Again, as I said, moving to a new country in the middle of your adolescence has its very unique challenges. And one way I remember telling a therapist about this was imagine, excuse me, imagine you're in a race and the whistle already blown and everybody's already running and you didn't hear it or you just noticed the race began and you're just trying to catch up. And that's how it felt for me coming
Mm.
to the States middle of adolescent is that people were developing their social groups and social identities and I was just trying to like showing up literally at party middle of the party and
Yeah.
everybody's already mingling already everybody's already having a good time. So
I
I
love that
spent my
analogy, you're in a race and the whistle's blown, everybody is gone, and you're just back there, just assessing the situation. Like, where do I go? Do I run that way or do I run that? Everybody knows where to go. I'm not sure, and I can relate to that because, like you, I'm also an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 21. And it was a different dynamic from yours. I came through an arranged marriage, but I can totally relate to that. And tell me if you can relate to this. One of the things I found when I came here is that I kind of lost my identity along the way because there are so many different cultures and tradition and just so much going on because America is just such a melting pot. It took me many years to find my identity and who I am. Did you actually experience that?
absolutely, absolutely. And in terms of the search we go through in finding out our authentic selves, I think what happens for maybe for those of us again came to the States from another country, I think initially you want to adopt and you want to integrate. So you celebrate everything that is fun and lovely about the American culture because you want to blend in. And then I realized a few years later, there was a sense that I wanted to reconnect with my native culture and then kind of like make that left turn, so to speak. And you try to get immersed back into some of your cultural traditions or the language or trying to meet new people in Los Angeles where I live that are from where I'm from. And so I realized what's so difficult with this identity search is that you kind of go back and forth. There are those months, or let's say year, all the American culture, I want to blend in there. And then there will be like a next year, I switch, so to speak, and I want to go back to my Middle Eastern culture and reconnect with them. And that kind of like ping pong, like going back and forth happened for me for many years until obviously I found my own personal balance of what I call like biculturalism and having something from each culture that resonates with me.
Yeah, and I think it's a very hard balance as you're saying it. It even gives me flashback and anxiety a little bit just to think about how do you balance it, because when you came here, you went to school, I went straight to work. So it's how do you balance it in school? How do you balance it in work? You're different at school, you're different at work, you look different, you speak different, you dress different. I remember I didn't even know how to dress. I was wearing flowers and checkered at the same time. And I was just like, how do I dress? And I started looking around other people and realizing, like, okay, I lost my identity because I was looking at other people and I pick up what they were doing. And it's okay sometimes to do that to a point, because I don't believe you leave your country to come to another country and not adjust a little bit to their culture and embrace their culture. I feel like it's so important to do that, but I feel it's important to embrace your culture also and find that balance on how to do that. So with that said, how did you eventually figure out? I know you said, eventually I figure out what that balance is, and what does that look like to you now?
So I guess before the story gets better, when I find my balance, another thing that happened was in order to find my sense of belonging, I think that's how I started to develop that perfectionism, where I wanted to be the perfect student in school and in college and get all the perfect grades. And there comes a little bit of people pleasing, right? You want to fit in and you want to make sure you're not making enemies, but making friends. So for me, again, before I found the balance, unfortunately, there were years of developing that perfectionism that also came along with a lot of anxiety.
Mm.
And I often reference, I think this was in my towards late on my 20s, I read Gifts of Imperfection from Brandon Brown. And that's when I realized I had my aha moment where, okay, behind all this anxiety and worry I have, I really am striving to be perfect in order to find this inner peace and in order to find this balance that came from, again, changing countries in the middle of my adolescence. So I think before we find the balance, we might have to get real with ourselves that the things we've been doing to find the balance that were unhealthy. Like again, for me, was trying to be perfect and perfectionism. And I think those discoveries had to happen in order for me to find the balance.
Yeah, can and I want to go back to something you said way back in the beginning, because now I remember when you and I met a couple of days ago, we talked about it, and it really made me think about you being an adult in public when you were translating for your parents, and then being that, going back to being the child, and having the role switch. Did that have an impact on you when it came to your perfectionism also? How did that play into it?
It definitely did. It definitely did. And it's a very confusing experience to have that autonomy and independence when you're out in public where as a translator you literally have a seat at the table. Like I remember being in the, parent teacher conferences and being between my teacher and my mom, translating the things they would say about me and translating the things they were saying about my brother. and you're literally sitting at the table with two adults. So there is that confusion where, oh, so I am independent and responsible to be the translator here, but when we go home, I have to kind of, obviously being a minor still, have to kind of fall into my child space and identity. And I think that's where the translation, what it does is that it puts that sense of responsibility. And I see this with some of my clients too, where we develop this sense of pressure that we have to make something really good out of our lives to justify our parents' sacrifices.
Hmm, that's interesting. So you were saying what you've done in your life for the most part, right? Not now, obviously, you've worked through this, but you were doing because you needed to justify what your parents had done for you.
Yes, I know it doesn't sound rational, and I
No, it
know
makes
it's
total sense. It makes total sense. It's almost a guilt that you carry, right? They've done so much for me and they've made so much sacrifices for me. I feel like I need to do something to show that I am contributing to society, to myself, and to my family.
yes. And again, this may sound a bit dramatic, but just to put in perspective, I think the belief we develop is I need to again make their sacrifices worthwhile. And therefore I should get all the good grades in school and I should do
Mm,
all the internships and you know, whatever our cultural norms might be within our community, follow them to a T. Again,
yeah,
whatever that might look within everybody's culture is a little different, but I think we all kind of have that picture in our head of, you know, feeling into that box and making our parents proud
yeah,
and again accomplishing things to show gratitude and again this twist of things they develop that says I have to make it worthwhile. They went through so much troubles for me, for my
yeah.
life to be here.
Did you feel any pressure from your parents in that regards, or was it just all in your head?
Sadly, all in my head. I know that may not be everybody's story, so I want to be very I want to be very compassionate towards those people who struggle with perfectionism that say to me, like, you know, I did have a mom, I did have a dad who had high expectations of me. That again, not to stereotype here, but they may say, oh, my dad was a lawyer, so he was very rigid in expectations. So I'm sure I know that's some people's story. For me, it really wasn't so much as my parents. It was again personal, perceived messages, and probably again came with the challenges hoping to transcend. Because that's another thing I found about perfectionism or trying to be perfect is a survival mechanism.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how our perceived thought of environment shapes us and changes and molds us into the person who we are today, because it's our thoughts are so powerful, right? But in a good way. Yours is like you became a psychologist, and now you're working with people on perfectionism. So obviously we know why you went into that role. But what are some things you have learned over the years regarding perfectionism that you want to share with us?
One of the most interesting things that I've found out about perfectionism that it's not just about the outcomes. I think there is this misconception about perfectionism that you just want things to be perfect, and therefore that seems like such a nice intention. It's no big deal, but in reality, what's underneath the perfectionism is this genuine fear of inadequacy or fear that you are not good enough
Hmm.
or that whatever you do won't be good enough. It's not good enough that you got into a good college. It's not good enough that you got good grades. You got to do more. You have to achieve more. And I think for those of us that dealt with perfectionism, it really needs to look at the inner lack of self love ultimately and work on feeling in that self love and self compassion.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Self love and self compassion. Um, when you so you're saying when you have a gap in self love and self compassion, you're trying to fill that gap. It could be part of, you could use perfectionism to fill that gap because you're never good enough.
Exactly. Definitely. Yes. And
Yeah.
I think it comes from this false thinking that if I just do things perfectly, then I will be liked. I will make people proud.
Okay, and you'll be accepted in circles and society if you are perfect and you're doing things just right. The acceptance,
Yes.
right? The societal acceptance and the environmental acceptance. We want people to like us and accept us. So that's really sound like a lot of pressure to put um, on oneself. How do you help your clients with this once you figure out what they're struggling with?
I love that we are acknowledging how much pressure that is because we still, I think, live in a society that rewards and glorifies perfect results and truly minimizes how debilitating perfectionism can get. So I do believe that it has to start with a personal recognition that while you're trying to be perfect, you've been neglecting yourself. While you're trying to be perfect, you've been your worst critic. And speaking of balance, while you're trying to be perfect, your life has been totally out of balance. And and
Yeah.
and and it's like you got to start
Yeah.
with that first realization and acknowledge that again, Brené Brown calls that perfectionism that armor. You have to realize
Yeah.
that armor is not working and it's time to put it down.
Yeah. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like before COVID, right, this was more accepted in the workplace to be perfect, to be that person who works all the time, 24/7, having their phones on them. It was almost like a badge of honor, right? That employee that's a perfectionism and needs to continually prove themselves. And since COVID, after COVID, I feel like some of those stigmas have been broken and people are more aware that that should not be the case and they're actually taking care of themselves. What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree with you. And I think that might be some of the gifts that we can at least try to take from the pandemic, because I know it's been so painful for so many people. And we can recognize there's the positive changes that came from that experience. I also think social media and podcasts have been really helpful too to pass the message or share the word that self care is not selfish and that having a balance in your life makes you more productive in the long run. So that's another thing I kind of use on my
Yeah.
clients who are so afraid of letting go of their perfectionism because one of their knee jerk reaction is like, well, if I'm not perfect, then I'm just going to be mediocre. If I'm not perfect, that means I have no standards or no goals in life. And I'm like, hold on. Nobody said you're not having any goals in life.
Yeah.
And so, again, starting to have a culture that embraces balance, self love, and realizing that when you get rest and you get to be, go out and play, whatever play might mean for you, whether it's dancing or um, hiking, that if you just go have fun a little bit and not always be in a work hustle mode, your productivity actually will benefit from it.
Yeah. Do you feel like perfectionism have different layers to it though? Because as you're speaking about the way people react to it, right, they're either one in the spectrum or the other. Do you feel there are layers to it? When you say perfectionism, for you, it might mean something else. And for me, it might mean something else.
Absolutely. Oh, 100%. I always think of it as there's so many different versions of it. So if we were to maybe stick with the productivity, I think that the most stereotypical definition of perfectionism are the type A go-getter, overly organized people, which again, that's one version of perfectionism. And then there's completely different version of perfectionism where because of the pressure to do things perfectly, people end up actually becoming very indecisive and
Mm.
they tend to procrastinate a lot and they come across as lazy, so to speak, or unmotivated. Well, when you slow down and talk through with them, you realize that behind their procrastination lies the pressure to be perfect that becomes very paralyzing. So yes, to your point, absolutely. There are so many different versions of perfectionism in relationships some might be a complete people pleaser and have that what we call codependency because of their perfectionism, and other people can be very controlling.
Yeah. I think mine would be the what's it called? Analysis paralysis.
Yes.
Because it's like if I can't get it right, I just can't get it right. I freeze. I freeze. I can't move forward with it. So I think that might be mine. Yeah, if there is one. So which one did you struggle with?
I was definitely the type A. I was the one that had everything planned 10 steps ahead and overly organized. And I still have to catch myself. That's another thing I often share with people when I point out the impact of coming to a new country, when I was 15 to finding out more about my perfectionism in my 20s. There's this opinion that, like, you must be then over it. And explained how when I first became a mom 7 years ago, perfectionism was right there, expecting me to do everything so perfectly. So to answer your question, yes, I still have to catch myself. Like when I have these podcasts, I still have a voice in my head like, don't stutter, don't mispronounce.
And it's quite okay if you stutter. I stutter all the time. I say people's names wrong all the time. It's like stuff that I do. But I'm getting better at it, and I'm giving myself grace. We're just having a conversation here. So I know you're working with your patients. What are some of the processes you use to help people work through their perfectionism?
There are really wonderful ways that I think we can work through it. I definitely encourage people to understand how it's showing up in their lives. Like when we were just talking about these different traits of perfectionism, it's very important to understand like where they are struggling with. Are they the procrastinators, or are they the overworkers, over planners? Which, by the way, people can also say they may start a new week like a Monday over planning, and then they get so burned out by Wednesday that Thursday, Friday they procrastinate. So they can also switch gears.
Right,
But
right.
I think first thing to do is really identify how it's showing up in your life. And then the other thing is maybe the more cognitive therapy, where, as you were saying about the power of our thoughts, I can't imagine any one of us to have any kind of healing if we are not looking at our inner dialogue and noticing where we are not being kind towards ourselves, and studying some of those negative beliefs, the limiting beliefs we may have developed through our personal life experiences. So I do think that the next thing would be to look into those internal dialogues, making sure that the beliefs that you hold dear to your heart are more compassionate, they are more flexible, they're more realistic, they're more balanced.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and even I did, I have to confess, up until maybe 7 to 8 years ago, I thought self talk, self affirmations were all hokey, right? I just didn't believe in it. And I started about 5 or 6 years ago, and it really works. It's one of the techniques I use with my clients, because the way I explain it, I said, we over the time span of our lives, we've created one neural pathway, and it's almost like a broken record that's playing in the background. So every decision we make, as soon as we're getting ready to make it, it just goes back to that one broken record that's playing. And the way I teach people is, you have to change that record. You have to replace it with a new record, and that's how you build new neural pathways. You have to talk to yourself. And in Dr. Menjie, I have to tell you what I do. I actually talk to myself subconscious like this. So let's say I text Dr. Menjie and she doesn't get back to me for 2 days. Right away, where does the broken records start playing, right? She doesn't want to talk to me. She doesn't this, she doesn't that. But I go back and I do this. I'm like, we're not going there today. We're not going there today, because she's busy. She has a life, she's a doctor, and she's got a lot going on. I will ping her again just to remind her, but I'm not going into the negative thought pattern. You don't get to go there today. Do you, what do you think about my process? I
Love it.
literally do that all day.
I love it. And honestly, one of my favorite things you did is, because I'm the same way, is having that, I guess, third voice, because you have your, negative voice chiming into your ear, and then you want to redirect yourself to a more balanced thinking, is that voice that says, I'm not going there today. And
Right.
that really resonates with me, because another thing that it's a little vulnerable for me to admit, but in my 20s, as I was again understanding what was not, why I was not feeling an inner peace. And I made a commitment to myself that I said, it's my job to love me. It's my
Mm.
job. Like, it's nobody else's job. Yes, I have my family cheering for me and I have good friends, but it's my job. So it's like that inner voice that says, nope, we are focused on self love. We're focused on self compassion. And that's what we do. So we're not going there.
Yeah. I love to hear, from a doctor's perspective that you go there like I do also to say, we're not going there today. And,
Oh,
and
yes.
I was doing a training yesterday and I told about 8 people in the room, I told them that and they all look at me like, what? And I said, this is how you train yourself to start thinking positively. And I use the next analogy I use, it's the compound effect. You can't just do it one day and then you don't do it the next day and you don't do it the next day. The more you do it, every day you do it, you are actually growing 1% and you are changing your thought process 1%. And we have the power to change our mindset. We just have to be disciplined about it.
I totally agree with you. And I also understand that it's hard to be consistent. And I think that's definitely one of the hardest things, to stay consistent. Some days I know it's easier than other days. And again, with your example of telling ourselves, I'm not going to go there, or I choose not to go there, what I also find very empowering is the pause.
Mm.
Because, like you were explaining, with the negative self talk, it's been there for so long and it's been our kind of go to thought pattern. And when we're trying to change things in internal, like, dialogues and the way that we perceive things, we have to pause. And by that pause, we can say, I'm not going there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, so we've learned so far that for perfectionists, being a perfectionism, there are different layers of it. There are different ways it's manifested in people. And you shared some processes with us that people can go through. First, they need to realize which one they're dealing with, right? Which demon they're dealing with, and then you help them work through that. But one of the things you just said to me is you have to, it's hard to be consistent like what I do. I've been doing it for so long. It comes naturally. And I have my process, but what would you advise people to do to remember and stay consistent, especially when it comes to self-talk and when it comes to just being an advocate for you and showing yourself grace?
That's a great question, because just because you're working on your perfectionism does not mean it still doesn't want to show up. And so when you're setting these goals for yourself, you really have to make sure that you're not going to try to do it all perfectly and fix everything that is related to your perfectionism all at once overnight. So I do think that it's about setting intention and making a decision on where you want to start this journey, and be patient with yourself, that it's a journey, not a destination. Again, with that perfectionistic thinking, it's not a checkbox. We're not just trying to, like, master something and graduate. It's this idea that we are choosing to live our lives authentically. We're choosing to live our lives where we are more compassionate towards ourselves, especially when we make mistakes. And so I would ask them to set an intention, and I would like them to focus on where you want to begin. And again, this takes a minute, because perfectionists will say, all of it. I want to fix all of it. I want everything to just be better by
That would be
tomorrow.
me. So that would be me. Oh my gosh, you're so speaking to me right now. Yeah. Yeah. So you said tell them take it easy and have grace on yourself because you're going to mess up. There are days when you're going to miss this, but just have some grace.
Absolutely. And when you think about, like, where to begin, I think there are maybe simple markers that everybody can follow. For an example, if you are type that procrastinating and your work life is really struggling, it's okay to start from there. Versus for
Right.
somebody else who's maybe struggling with social anxiety and fear of making mistakes, and it's really interfering with them attending gatherings like holidays are coming up. And so we would focus on that more social life, not work life. So I do encourage people like, let's make it very individualized. What is it right now that might be the problem? Like, let's say somebody's struggling with insomnia because they cannot stop overthinking as sign of their perfectionism. So I do also go back to what their needs are that brought them to therapy, brought them to coaching. Is like, let's from there rather than trying to fix everything all at once. And that kind of gives us a little bit of direction to like where to start.
Wow. Thank you so much. This was just so good. I didn't know where it was gonna go after we talked 2 days ago, but I feel like it was so good and it's so impactful. And I think this is the first time we've gone into details on the podcast regarding perfectionism, so it will add a lot of value to people. Thank you, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing about you. I know that sometimes that's hard. Part of your perfectionism wants to hold that back and say, I can't, I shouldn't be sharing that, but you overcame and you're being vulnerable. So awesome. What's a takeaway for our audience today?
I hope their takeaway will be about the value of self compassion and the power of being kind to themselves. I hope that they give themselves lots of love today. Maybe just a gentle hug or making themselves some cup of tea, and remember that they are deserving of the love and compassion.
I absolutely agree, and I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Menije, for taking time to share this valuable information in our podcast. And I agree with her. Be gentle with yourself. Give yourself grace, and watch what will happen. And with that, today, friends, it's a wrap.